The new 2020 iPad Pro is out and it's definitely something to talk about. What's going on, guys? My name is David Tomic and welcome back to the channel. Today we're talking about the brand new 2020 iPad Pro, all its amazing features, and if it truly is the best iPad on the market. We're going to be comparing it to the iPad mini and the iPad Air. So as we all know, the iPad Pro was released just a few short weeks ago. The main upgrade we have seen is the rear camera bump. Like all the new iPhones and all the new Samsungs, it's coming out with more and more cameras in the back. The one thing I don't really realize is who's using that camera on the back of an iPad. Personally, that's not my cup of tea. But obviously people are definitely going out and taking photos with their iPads. The new iPad Pro will feature a triple camera setup on the back, which is technically only a dual camera setup. You have a 12 megapixel wide camera and also a 10 megapixel ultra wide camera. The third camera on the back isn't technically a camera, it's a depth sensing camera, a lidar sensor. It is used for augmented reality and that is basically it. So I can see that Apple is going for a very, very big push on augmented reality, which is going to be really cool because you can do some awesome stuff. But right now in 2020, that augmented reality sensor, that LiDAR sensor, has no real advanced purpose. And considering that the iPad Pro 11-inch model starts at 1,379 Australian dollars, this is very steep for what is basically just the old iPad Pro. They do continue to focus on this camera update and the camera module itself. So instead of getting a 43 megapixel panoramic image, you get a 63 megapixel panoramic. Again, not really too sure how much value there is in that, but that's okay, that's just me personally. You go up to 4K video with cinematic stabilization and continuous autofocus. These features are really, really good on a smartphone and on a camera, but on an iPad, I'm not too sure how good they are. How many people are going to be running around with their iPad going, oh, gotta capture this, gotta see that? I don't know. I guess the older generation definitely does use their iPads very differently to how the younger generation uses it. So there is probably a purpose and a reason for this, and it's definitely a welcomed upgrade. I love seeing good quality video regardless of the product it comes from. What does pique my interest, and I think has piqued many reviewers' interest at the same time, is the new Magic Keyboard that basically allows your iPad to float in air majestically. So this Magic Keyboard is literally a new phase for the iPad to take it from just a tablet to truly a computer. And I think it is a good step in the right direction. It does significantly differentiate an iPad from any other tablet just sitting there on the table, being a tablet basically. So I think this is a really good product and I can't wait to review it when it does actually come out properly. And the rest of the spec bumps are kind of insignificant as well. The A12 chip now goes to an A12Z chip, which is kind of like going from an iPhone to an iPhone S. It's that awkward in-between stage that they're just trying to get you to buy the next product so they can make a little bit more money. So from a performance point of view, it hasn't been able to increase it that much and give you that much more power and demand out of a tablet. Overall, we're not getting the biggest updates and we're not getting the biggest jumps in performance. We are getting a new iPad Pro that looks exactly the same as the old one. It's still USB-C. It still does everything the same. It just has a bigger camera on the back. So from iPad Pro 1 to iPad Pro 2, not enough of a jump in my personal opinion. But does that mean it is still the king of all iPads? Well, let's compare them against the iPad mini and the iPad Air. So to create a fair and reasonable comparison, we'll start with the iPad Pro 11-inch, the iPad Air 10.5-inch, and the iPad mini 7.9-inch. The iPad Pro comes in at 1329 Australian, the iPad Air 779, and the iPad mini 599. The iPad Pro is the only one with the upgraded chip of the A12Z processor. Both the Air and the mini have an A12 chip. Both the Air and mini again have 256 gigabytes of maximum storage, whilst the iPad Pro jumps up to 1 terabyte. Both the iPad Air, it's pretty much similar down the whole line. I'll try to point them out when they're different. Have one camera versus the 3 camera setup on the iPad Pro. They both only film in 1080p versus 4K video. In video recording mode, they both only have tap to focus versus continuous autofocus. The rear cameras are identical on the Air and the Mini at 8 megapixels versus the 12 and 10 on the iPad Pro. All 3 of them actually have a 7 megapixel front-facing camera. So for any video conferencing app, you're going to be getting the exact same video quality out of these 3 devices. The iPad Pro does have a little bit of a leg up with 4 internal speakers versus the 2 in both the other devices, with the iPad Pro again having that superiority of the Magic Keyboard, the iPad Air having compatibility with the Smart Keyboard, and the iPad Mini only having privilege to a Bluetooth connected keyboard. Both the Air and Mini only have access to a 1st generation pencil. iPad Pro has 2nd generation, whilst both the Air and Mini use lightning cables versus a USB-C. What does get interesting here is the fact that the iPad Mini has a 326 pixels per inch display resolution versus the 264 pixels per inch in the iPad Air and the iPad Pro. So from a pixel density point of view, the iPad Mini actually has one of the highest density pixel screen ratios versus the other 2. All 3 have a 10-hour battery life, whilst the iPad Mini and the iPad Air have Touch ID versus Face ID on the iPad Pro. So from a very generic specs point of view, and given the fact that I have access to all 3 of these, I use them in my daily life. There's the iPad Mini, which my partner uses absolutely every day. I use a standard iPad Air 99% of the time, and on occasion I take the iPad Pro to client meetings. For what I personally do, I need a bigger screen, so I do like the iPad Air. I don't think I can justify the double value for the iPad Pro. For an everyday user, I think that the iPad Mini is hands down the best iPad on the market for the best price. So in my personal opinion, my ranking for an everyday user would be iPad Mini, iPad Pro, and then the iPad Air. The reason the iPad Pro supersedes the iPad Air for an everyday user is because if you are making the decision between an iPad Air and an iPad Pro, you need this for a laptop style device. The iPad Pro has those capabilities, has those extra functionalities, and has the better note-taking capabilities with the 2nd generation pencil. I don't think it warrants the price difference. There's no way I would spend that much if I had to choose, but it is the better device out of those 2. That's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, smash that little subscribe button 2020 style. And because we're still all locked up in quarantine, I will see you on Wednesday.